Hi, my name is Georgia, and welcome to a series called COMS Major Explains, a series where I explain different concepts and phenomena in pop culture. My credentials are that I'm about a month away from having a degree in communication and media studies, and second, I am also slightly chronically online. Today, I'm going to be talking about how TikTok has changed and arguably ruined the music industry. Before I dive into TikTok specifically, I'm going to briefly explain how the music industry works, as well as how record deals work. So prior to MTV becoming more popular in the 1980s, a lot of music that was consumed was done through radio broadcasts, jukeboxes and diners, vinyl records, live music, all of the things. And so in the 60s, we saw the beginning of TV being used as a mode of marketing music, but it wasn't really super popular until MTV started to blow up in the 80s. Cut to the 90s and early 2000s, we had so many modes of physical distribution for music, from vinyls, cassette tapes, CDs, you name it. We had it. Then in the late 90s and early 2000s, we saw the rise of platforms like Napster, iTunes, LimeWire, all of the things, which allowed people to download MP3 copies of individual tracks from albums instead of buying the whole album. And they were able to do this for free or for very little, which was great for us, the consumers, but not so great for artists and record labels. Now, why is this? This is because of royalties. With record deals, artists and labels will essentially sign a contract with each other saying that the artist will make music with that label, often for a set number of albums. For example, Miss Sabrina Carpenter, former Disney kid, signed a 5-album deal with Hollywood Records back in 2014. Hollywood Records, I think, is owned by Disney, or is like Disney adjacent. Either way, she signed a 5-album deal with Hollywood Records in 2014. This took her 7 years to fulfill. But essentially, for the course of that 7 years, she could only record and distribute music with Hollywood Records. She couldn't do anything with another record label. And so this can vary from artist to artist and label to label, but essentially, in the time that it takes the artist to complete however many albums or whatever that they've agreed to, the record label will fund the distribution, the recording, sometimes merch and touring, it kind of depends. In addition to the distribution, labels will also pay the artist a certain amount of royalties. Now, this is a little bit different with streaming, at least with CDs back in the 90s. The royalty rates were about 10 to 12% for CD sales. So if an album made $1,000 in sales, in CD sales, the artist would see about $100 to $120 of that $1,000. Depending on the rate. So when things like Napster started to pop up, instead of labels being able to sell a CD for $10 to $20, listeners were able to cherry pick their favorites from the album, as well as being able to download them for free. Cut to the late 2000s and early 2010s, we see the rise of streaming platforms like Spotify, as well as Apple Music. Spotify and Apple are two of the bigger streaming platforms, but I'm mostly going to be focusing on Spotify. And this is for 2 reasons. 1, I'm more familiar with Spotify, and 2, Spotify does something very interesting in the way that it functions and some of the features that it has, which I will get into in a moment. But before I get into that, I want to briefly talk about one of the big themes that is present within media companies as a whole, and that is the tension between risk and failure. So, media companies are always engaged and perceiving a level of risk when they're making content, whether that be a TV series, a movie, an album, you name it, they're scared. And this is because professional media is very expensive to create, and these companies also don't know if the content is going to reach its target audience. And this is actually also why you see a lot of sequels and reruns and reproductions of the same plot lines and themes, is because these media companies figure out what consumers want to see and they just keep giving them the same thing. Back to Spotify. Any of you who are Spotify users will know this, but Spotify is really good at making curated playlists. Scholar Liz Pelly even says, quote, "Playlists are king, and particularly the ones curated by Spotify." Now, this is because Spotify's success as a platform comes from its music discovery algorithm, and its ability to give listeners more music that is similar to what they're already listening to. These curated playlists also take songs out of the context of the albums that they're released in. Now, this was still happening prior to streaming, with only some songs getting radio play and being made into mixtapes, whether that be on cassettes or CDs, but Spotify's focus on playlist curation has really accentuated this. At the same time, the 2010s also brought the rise of social media platforms, with Instagram launching in 2010, Vine, RIP Vine, launching in 2013, then Musical.ly launching in 2014, and then relaunching as TikTok in 2016. The popularity of social media has also led to what David Neilberg and Thomas Pohl describe as the platformization of culture. And essentially, these platforms are changing the ways that media industries operate, and they're correct. Because social media platforms are algorithmically driven, they just continue to give people the same kind of content that they're already interacting with. Which is why my Instagram Explore page and my TikTok For You page are going to be wildly different from my friends or my mom or like anyone. They're all tailored to each individual user, which is great in a sense. But at the same time, these platforms, and by extension the algorithms, are also getting to decide what content blows up and what content doesn't. Continuing with TikTok, another scholar, Jeremy Morris, described TikTok as compressed and intense communication. So due to the time limits on TikTok, only letting you post 60 to 90 second videos, this forces users to get their point across in a very short period of time. The time limit has been increased to 3 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, but the majority of videos on TikTok still fall within this 60 to 90 second time range, which allows its users to consume a large amount of content in a very short period of time. An outcome of this has allowed and kind of forced users to clip songs, only feature parts of them, or speed them up to be able to use the whole portion without it being cut off by this time limit, which that means that we see sped up songs. Sped up songs are a way to compress as much into the message of the video as possible, which has two noticeable outcomes. First of all, this has led to many artists focusing on making songs that are clippable rather than the song as a whole. Artists also want to build hype around music and around the music that they're releasing, which has led to some artists teasing songs and albums way before they're released. For example, Miss Tate McRae, a singer and dancer from Calgary, Go Canada, released a single called Greedy back in September of 2023, even though the album that this song appeared on, Think Later, did not get released until December of 2023. Now, she did release Greedy as a single, but she also teased this song for about 6 weeks prior to the release, and then segued this into teasing the album in like October, November, when it didn't get released until December. Which, if you go onto her TikTok profile, which like it's her account and she can do whatever she wants with it, there's definitely a chunk of content if you just scroll, and it's the same exact clip of Greedy for like a substantial amount of videos, which kind of led users to get kind of tired and bored of hearing the same stuff all the time, which like, fair enough. But yeah, the second outcome of this is that because artists know that their songs are going to be clipped, sped up, or otherwise altered, it leads them to get ahead of the curve by releasing sped up and altered versions of these songs along with the original versions. One example of this can be seen with SZA and her album SOS, where she released sped up and slowed down versions of songs Kill Bill and Snooze that both appear on this album. She also did this with a song called Saturn that she released earlier this year. I think it was in January of 2024. Another artist who has done this is Miss Ariana Grande with her single Yes And that appeared on the album Eternal Sunshine, where she actually released over 8 different versions of Yes And, plus remixes, so technically more than 8. I'll give you a list. I need to read this off of my notes. It includes sped up, slowed, instrumental, extended mix, a cappella, extended mix instrumental, edit, and extended edit. Plus the remixes, which is a lot. But what does this all mean? This means that artists are now having to optimize their content in order for them to be successful, in order to do well on Instagram and TikTok. Is there anything that we can do as consumers that we can do to stop it? Honestly, I'm not sure. But being able to see and acknowledge the problem will allow us to bring attention to it and maybe, hopefully, possibly fix it. Don't quote me on that, though. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had scripted, so thank you so much for watching. I could talk about social media for days, and I will see you in the next episode of COMS Major Explains. Okay, bye!